As a great man once said, it's way darker this time. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the F1 Isn't Real podcast with me, your host, Ben Weather, formerly of F1 Every Week. Through more than 80 episodes and 2 years, I broadcasted the key F1 news points of the week. But as the sport of Formula 1 seemingly enters a new dark age of Verstappen dominance, the least I can do is give some even darker takes on the sport I love. But let's stop procrastinating and sink our comically large teeth into round 19 of the 2023 Formula 1 World Championship and take a look at the winners and the spinners of the 23rd annual Mexican Grand Prix. One of the most catastrophic spinners of the weekend, both literally and metaphorically, was the boy from Guadalajara, Sergio Checo Perez, who laid a massive goose egg at his home track in the view of swathes of adoring fans. Despite gaining a grand total of 0 points this week, Checo does earn my inaugural Daniel Kvyat award for the most sizable torpedo, as he cut right across my golden boy Charlie Leclerc at the opening turn, sending his car careering out of contention before the race even began, with a move that seemed almost down to Dutch courage, induced by some of his hometown tequila possibly, as opposed to anything close to certainty. To be fair to Sergio, this was probably his only opportunity to take out teammate Verstappen from this Grand Prix, who used some of his own Dutch courage to once again prevail in this Grand Prix. Once again prevail in this Grand Prix. Once again prevail in this Grand Prix. But we'll talk more about that later. After the race, Checo seemed almost on the verge of emotional breakdown, and it's tough not to feel for the guy, who eloquently explained the reasoning behind the move in his post-race interview, asserting that he would not have been able to live with himself had he not gone for the pass, with a podium in the last 2 trips to Mexico City seemingly more excruciating than not vying for the win. So it's safe to say that this may have been a crime of passion as opposed to an in any way calculated move. But frankly, Checo can't really afford to keep making mistakes. He's been without any silverware since Monza and is now retired in 2 of the last 5 races. So it's really getting to crunch time for the Mexican. And if he had shown some custody over the brake pedal, then maybe he could have used a great slipstream to crack into the podium places. But, as if his car was a cartel member who considered ratting out their compadres to La Chota, Checo elected to retire his RB19, lest it sustain further injuries at the hands of the Mexico streets. This week, Christian Horner assured the press that Sergio doesn't need P2 in the championship in order to retain his Red Bull drive. But a man who I know will be gunning hard for that role if the Mexican does miss out on second is our first winner of the Grand Prix, the wonder from down under, Daniel Ricciardo. What a comeback week for the Aussie. Since his return to the sport with AlphaTauri mid-season, following an abysmal stint at McLaren, Danny hasn't exactly been lighting up the timesheets. He broke his hand in the Dutch Grand Prix free practice, putting him out of contention for 5 races. And this gave New Zealander Liam Lawson a chance to really shine, with 2 points and 2 P11s in his quintet of starts, seemingly showing up Daniel's 13th and 16th in his opening attempts for the less interesting Scuderia. And his return in Austin looked even worse, with Daniel himself calling this display miserable. But Ricciardo was back at his best in Mexico. He secured his finest qualifying result since Belgium 2021. God, Belgium 2021. with 4th place at a track where he secured his final pole in the sport to date back in 2018. And in possibly the worst car on the grid, Daniel held his own, holding out at 6th place for the vast majority of the race, with George Russell almost falling into his grasp in the final laps. But he was forced to settle for 6th place. He even survived a precision commentator's curse from David Croft, who observed that Daniel and Yuki's combined efforts would lift Alfa off the bottom of the Constructors' Championship. This fine display of ignorance sent Tsunoda to the Shadow Realm through the power of Piastri at turn 1, but Daniel valiantly held off the sirens' cries, indeed hoisting AlphaTauri from 10th to 8th in the standings, despite the best efforts of the commentators. Do I think Daniel's form is sustainable nowadays? Absolutely not. He'll probably crash out in Sao Paulo, but I just love to see him win. First points with Toro Rosso since Brazil 2013. Good stuff. Another spinner this week. Mexican fans. They turned up in their thousands to see Sergio Perez race. The whole country was behind him and, as we all know, he blew it in the first corner. It felt like every other lap there was some snarky remark about people filing out the grandstands so fast it was like Sergio Perez himself was waiting outside. Well, I guess he was, because he was out. Sorry, Checo fans, but he's not my number 2 driver. Oh, to be back in 2018. Ricardo for President 2024. I stand by it. The fans would go on to take out their frustrations on my poor baby Charles Leclerc, who was mercilessly booed during his 3rd place acceptance speech. Charlie Boy got another pole position out of nowhere and was yet again swallowed alive by maximum capacity reached Verstappen, the Dutchman's 10th victory off the back of Leclerc's P1 in quali. But Charles's massacre from Max would only be the 2nd most devastating L for Ferrari this weekend, as it's back again to those pesky fans. A video of 2 young Scuderia fans getting first round KO'd by a rowdy Checophile in the middle of the stadium section went viral on Sunday, with football hooliganism seemingly having entered the mainstream in F1. What a farce for the FIA, who enforce measures to reduce paddock crowds for this very reason, and have dramatically failed in front of hundreds of fans at the event, thousands of people online, and readers of major news publications such as Sports Illustrated, which commented exclusively on the issue. Keep up the work, guys. And I'm afraid the FIA just keep botching it this weekend, with Alonso, Hamilton and Verstappen all escaping penalties, despite holding up the entire rest of the pack during qualifying, which now sets a precedent that unnecessary blocking in the pit lane is not sanctionable. They never quite get it right, do they? Another winner this weekend, Max Verstappen's bodyguards. The Dutchman could clearly see the writing on the wall, and so drafted in some crack troops, specifically for the Mexico City Grand Prix. He feared for his safety, following his refusal to comply with team orders, which could have benefited Checo, such as in Brazil last year, which, granted, was a bit of a bitch move from Maxi. But what I find astounding is that Verstappen actually thinks anyone cares enough about him to, put a hit out on him. Ludicrous. But his bodyguards still get the win in my books, for possibly the easiest paycheck in the F1 paddock since Fernando Alonso's Singapore 2008 win bonus. On the topic of Ferdy, he and Aston Martin had an absolute mare, earning my Nikita Mazepin Award for Deadest Weekend. It's hard for me to believe that Fernando went 6 for 8 on podiums to start the season, and was at one point locked in for 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship. Aston Martin were miles up the road from McLaren, and it looked as if they were going to be in a dramatic three-way tussle for second, with Ferrari and the Mercs come season end. But, like a tortilla sombrero filled with guacamole, neglected by the whole family at a quinceañera, the strong, brittle walls of El Plan began to turn to mush before collapsing entirely, leaving behind an unappetizing green mess. An apt description of Aston Martin Aramco Cognizant F1 team's 2023 race car. The new quote-unquote upgrades have been an absolute joke, with a double Q1 exit in quali and a double DNF in the Grand Prix, making this Fernando's 10th straight retirement due to a mechanical or technical issue. Even as Aston Martin were falling off a cliff in performance mid-season, the reliability of their car, at least for Alonso, had kept him at least on the fringe of the runnings. But back-to-back mechanical issues are a sign of even more distressing things to come. What really got me worried this weekend was how pedestrian Fernando Alonso looked. He made next to no inroads against backmarkers in the GP, unable to take on Alpha Tauris, Alfa Romeos, and even Logan Sargent. I think all of this probably says more about Aston than it does about Alonso, but weekends like this remind us that he's human and can't just jump into any car and make it work. Another spinner, Mike Crack, team principal of Aston Martin, who attested that 2 bottom 5 times in FP2 were not representative of the form of Aston Martin, with a comment that PR really needs to advise against from now on, as the F1 gods were so disgusted by the confidence of the Aston boss that they handed his first double DNF of the Silverstone-based owner's career with Aston. Biggest cheat this week? That's right, we're still on Aston Martin, and it's Lance Stroll, who was forced to start from the pit lane for the second week in a row due to Aston Martin mechanics' hopeless mangling of the Frankenstein monster-esque AMR 23 under parc fermé conditions. But when he finally did get out on track, Lance took the opportunity to further add to his rap sheet, with some disgusting movement in the braking zone against Logan Sargent of all people. I mean, come on. When you're forced to cheat against goddamn Logan Sargent, you know your car is trash. Funniest radio message of the weekend? Esteban Ocon, who pulled off some of the weakest threats on the radio since 6-9, claiming, "You can tell the Haas that I'm going to go for it, so they better be ready," and then proceeding to be held off from 10th, while in DRS range of Hülkenberg for more than 15 laps. Do better, Esteban. Ocon did eventually prevail in that battle, but Hülkenberg's efforts will be rewarded with the Nico Hülkenberg Award, for no matter how well they raced, they still came away with nothing. The German dragged the Haas as far as it would go, but he too was cursed by premature team principal celebrations, with Gunther Steiner expectantly chirping that Haas had lots more to come. Well, Nico showed how much more they had for about 55 laps before the bottom fell out and Nico ended up 13th, when he really should have taken the point, which would have been his first since Australia. Finally, let's have a look at the biggest winner of the weekend. There's Hamilton, who proved that the Mercedes is still decent even when they aren't cheating. Albon, who impressed in practice, disappointed in quali, and expertly picked up the pieces for his second P9 in a row. But come on, who are we kidding? It's got to be Nozza Norris Calrissian Lil Lando himself. What more is there to say that hasn't already been said? From P17, he assassinated the competition, gaining 12 positions, the most in his F1 career, and an improbable 5th place, his first in Mexico. Get in there, Lando. So, we've gone from the dark side to the light. The frustration